So to see is to be. While this statement resonates to many as something that is poetic, this conception of photography reveals something more substantial and perhaps existential about our experience of the world, especially when viewed through the lens of phenomenology. Okay. So tonight we shall endeavor to view photography in a philosophical manner, and as our guest puts it, inquire into how photography and photographs shape our contemporary human experience. So thank you for joining us tonight for episode 5 of the Marites Talks, Kwentuhan sessions on Philippine photography entitled Philosophy of Photography, A New Way of Seeing. Tonight we have Dr. Remmon Barbaza, Associate Professor and former Chair of the Department of Philosophy, School of Humanities of the Ateneo de Manila University. And perhaps, no, Docs, we should add the label photographer in the introduction. So later I'll ask you about it. Okay, so some ano lang, house rules. Yeah, so some house rules lang and some reminders. So this is a recorded Zoom session. You will be prompted by Zoom for your consent in the recording of this material. Number 2, the recording shall be uploaded to Photography Chismis PH and its various platforms, such as, but is not limited to Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify for educational purposes in the aim of contributing to the discourse of photography in the Philippines. So that's a mouthful. No? This episode of the Kwentuhan session shall not be monetized. So derived knowledge from this program should be cited accordingly based on the conventions and laws on intellectual property in the Philippines as applicable. And then lastly, this Kwentuhan session is an informal discussion and is not a lecture. Comments and questions shall be recognized accordingly by the host and moderator as applicable. So we'll dedicate time later. We'll open the floor for questions. But since medyo yung iba sa inyo baka kating-kating na mag-ask, you can put it in the chat box na. Ayan, so a little bit of plugging. So Photography Chismis is on Spotify, it's on YouTube, and it's recently we're now available in Apple Podcast. So dun sa mga Apple users. So to start with, Doc, so may I ask, so how did you get into photography? And in extension, so why stretch the discussion of photography into the domain of philosophy?
Okay, good evening. Good evening, everyone. We're looking at the list of guests, so we're wondering whether we should speak in Filipino or English because I had friends from, let's say, Finland who asked whether she could promote. No? So in that case, we will be forced to speak in English. But I think as of now, we're all able to understand Filipino.
Yes.
So we'll probably be switching, no, code switching, no.
Yeah.
So magandang gabi sa lahat. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure it's Saturday, no? Saturday nights would probably be better spent doing something else rather than doing philosophy, sleeping and watching Netflix. So thank you. You're here. That means you're interested. And thank you also to Tony, for inviting me. I was Tony and I, we haven't really met in person yet. So this is the age of online interaction. So I just got a message from him and he invited me, and I thought it's a good thing, so I said yes. So here we are, and I suppose you're here either because you're interested in photography in itself or philosophy, from the philosophical perspective, or even both. So we'll see. So as Tony said, later on we'll have a chance to hear from you also. So if I remember the two questions of Tony. So first, how did I get into photography? Well, I think like most of us, I got hold of a camera in the 80s. I was in college, and I still remember what camera that was. It was a Canon AV1. I think it's an entry-level camera with a kit lens, 50mm 1.8, and the only reason why my family was able to buy that because my father won in a lottery, in a car lottery, and we sold the car and the proceeds, so we had some money, so a little extra. So my brother and I bought the camera I still remember, in Farmers Cubao. No? And since then, I was so fascinated with, you know, photography, what it can do, the images, is something I couldn't explain. But to cut the long story short, I kept the interest. No, it never left me. So up to now. So yeah, so 40 years now, right? And ano ba yung second question? Why stretch photography to the realm of philosophy, right, Tony? Yeah, well, um, as it happens in I suppose in most universities, it's not really the university that decides. Now it's usually the individual professors who propose new courses, and they may or may not get approved. No, so actually this has been in my mind for a number of years now, and there's a lot of process. There's a whole process to go through, paperwork. So it took me some time before this finally got approved. No, and in fact, I had to make several revisions, no? Because of course there's a standards committee. Not all proposals can be accepted. But luckily they approved of my proposal. And what I had in mind is simply, and why philosophy? Because uh, I don't think it's difficult to recognize that photographs are really, especially in our time now, are really a constant uh, part of our daily existence. Now we either produce or consume photographs, as it were, right? We take photos and we look at them. So as we can say, we constantly produce and consume. No, if we use the economic language, no. So and as a philosopher, we always are on the lookout for human experience, since it's now a very common part of human experience. There might be something in it, right? Now, what does it mean for us to be consuming images in at a rate that has not been or had not been before imagined before the digital age, right? Now it's so normal, but this would be mind-blowing, like 20, 30, 40 years ago. So yun lang, no? Is our existence changed by the fact that it is that we have photographs everywhere, that we look at them often, and we make them, right? So yeah, initially yun muna, no?
Thing na mention ko kanina, no, and also in our preliminary conversations, we see some teachers and instructors integrating philosophical dimension to their teachings, no. For BNIL, so we're the only college in the Philippines who has a dedicated AB photography program. So it's not under fine arts, it's not under communication arts. So ano siya, it's a dedicated photography program. So some of our lecture classes, the philosophical aspect and also the theory are integrated. However, when I saw your post na shinare ni VJ, so VJ is a co-faculty sa BNIL. And when he shared it to me, I was building yung ituturo ko for photography trends. And in the West, back in 2010, they already had a dedicated academic journal about the philosophy of photography. Sa UK, meron na talaga. I saw your post. And then na-realize ko, finally meron na parang institutionalized. Given that, no, so as an academic institution, what does Ateneo aim in giving a dedicated subject for philosophy of photography?
Okay, so as I've said earlier, it really doesn't work, at least in the Ateneo. No? It doesn't work like top bottom. No? It's not as if the administrators decide, oh, we need a course philosophy of photography, and let's look for a professor who can offer it. No, but it's really the professor's initiative. Now we are encouraged actually by the university to come up with new courses regularly, like every 3-5 years. So before I've come up with, I've introduced in the Ateneo de Manila University philosophy of technology, philosophy of the city, and now it's philosophy of photography. So in response to your question, what's in the mind of what's in it now? Why did the university introduce? So again, it's not the university as an institution, no? But individual professors. But to some uh, in some way that is also correct, no, the fact that my proposal went through review process by the standards committee, by the curriculum committee, sorry, not the standards, but the curriculum committee. And in fact we had series of questions and revisions to work on, and finally it was approved. So I think what's behind that is, first of all, being a Jesuit university, and maybe the Jesuit spirituality has something to do with that. That there's not there's no there's no part in the human experience that is not worthy of reflection. If we put it in a more spiritual, in more spiritual terms, finding God in all things. But we don't have to believe in God. No, we don't have to be religious to to understand an openness to every facet of the human experience. No? I can be an atheist and still be appreciative of every aspect of human existence. And as I've said, no, I don't think it's difficult to recognize, to see that our time now is flooded with photographic images. No? Photographs are so much a part of our lives, so it deserves it deserves reflection. It deserves philosophical inquiry. So there, no? And we'll see. No? If it goes as planned, then my course will be launched next school year. No? Yeah.
So that's in August, no? Next school year or
Yeah, that's right. That's right. No, it should be in August pala this year, the next
uh,
academic year. No? Unless they change their mind, but that's the last thing I heard from the administrators. No?
when we were discussing this, no, Doc, medyo na-curious ako on how it's going to be framed. Pero since obviously it's under the philosophy department, and
Yeah.
when we were discussing, where you were saying that it's going to be framed under the lens, yan, para photographic yung mga metaphors natin, within the lens of phenomenology, no. So curious ako doon because how photography has been taught, or at least in general in Philippine universities, has always been in the realm of communication arts, fine arts. In our case, it's called the School of New Media Arts, and then you have commercial arts in the LSU. The marketing students and advertising students, they're being taught photography in the commercial arts naman. So given those parang traditional, quote unquote traditional framing of how photography is being taught, how different would this discussion be, especially that you specifically mentioned it's using phenomenology and more specifically Heideggerian phenomenology?
Yeah. Okay. So, well, the easiest answer to that is because I worked on Heidegger for my PhD in Munich, and I'm not over I'm not over Heidegger. So it's just his body of work is just immense, and his thinking continues to shape the intellectual world. And but even setting aside Heidegger and the philosophy, I think everyone has heard of the famous line from Socrates. Socrates slash Plato. An unexamined life is not worth living. So applying it to photography, an unexamined photographic life is not worth engaging in. We might say. So what makes this philosophy of photography, and not just a photography class, well, the thing with photography is, and to I think consternation or what annoys other people, outside philosophy. You can fill in the blanks. Philosophy of X. And as I've said,
Yeah.
I've offered philosophy of death. Philosophy of death one summer. I've been teaching philosophy of the city, philosophy of technology. It can be anything. Philosophy of X. Um, eh, I think it belongs to the nature of philosophy to be asking questions, more than finding answers now. So that's the part of philosophy. Uh, because we can go on with our lives, taking photographs, uh, consuming them, looking at them, but without asking ourselves, what happens to a life that is, or maybe to begin with, do photographs shape our lives? In what way? Is my eating habit Are my eating habits now changed because I need to take a photograph first and imagine how they will be posted in Instagram? And that's just one example. When we travel, no, we already have preconceived ideas of what sort of images we'd like to share right away. No? So and even that, no, you can see, no, that we're behaving differently, because of the way photography is being done. No? We're behaving differently. We're experiencing things differently, and I think that deserves some examination. No? So that's the side of philosophy. No? Now the side of photography. I always like to go back to the original meaning, no? And Heidegger also used to do that, not to look at the original. And we all know, no, photos and graphene, no? Writing light, the writing, to write with light, no, to write through light, no? So it's really a writing, and it's really an encounter with light, no? So photography really is an experience of the way light, and of course, when we speak of light, there's light and shadow, right? So um, every image is a play of light and shadow, and to link it with Heidegger now, and Heidegger linking it with the pre-Socratics, meaning the philosophers before Socrates, like Heraclitus, the ancient Greek experience of the play between concealment and unconcealment. No? May nagtatago lagi. No? You look at an image, no? And it can be a photograph, it can be a painting, it can be a sculpture, and there will always be something that's hidden. No? And because there's always something hidden, and there's always something also that's being revealed. No? And I think that's the power of photographs. No? But as I've said, anything, even a song, a song is never exhausted. A symphony, a poem. So this is really photography is just one way, but it's a special way, and it deserves, I think, a special philosophic inquiry. Yeah. Sorry,
Yung
I keep talking.
okay lang, Doc. Okay lang, Doc. Ano naman sa isip ko is, I had to research about what makes Heideggerian phenomenology different. Since you mentioned the light, I also came across secondary sources that they were commenting that as a metaphor, that the light allows the being to achieve authenticity. How is that made external or made visual? Kasi one of the difference with photography and other experiences is that it's visual. So there's a visual phenomena.
Yeah. So if I can go back to I think the first part of the question, what's distinct or special with the Heideggerian phenomenology? The word phenomenology has been used by many philosophers. Heidegger certainly wasn't the first one. Even way back to Hegel, one of his major works is Phenomenology of the Spirit. And you mentioned Husserl, no? So the word phenomenal has been used by different thinkers in different ways, no? But I'm more familiar with Heidegger and phenomenology, as I said, because that's what I worked on for my doctorate, no? And I'm endlessly, I'm infinitely amazed by and awed by Heidegger's understanding of phenomenology as, and I'll try to say it the best I could in my memory, from my memory. You know, in Being and Time, he says the phenomenology is apophynestai ta phenomena. So he quotes, he uses Greek, no, and then the English translation, to let what shows itself be seen from itself, just as it shows itself from itself. And I'm as I've said, I'm endlessly um, awed by that understanding. If you read it, it's a very simple sentence. No? Phenomenology is to let what shows itself be seen from itself, just as it shows itself from itself. Now, if you think it's philosophy, it's phenomenology, and the stereotypical understanding of philosophy has to do with thinking. But that definition has not a single word about thinking. To do phenomenology is not primarily to think. It's not even primarily to see. The work of phenomenology is the work of liberation, the work of letting. The first word is let. It's a letting. It's not a seeing, but a letting be seen. So and this brings us to the very, very difficult philosophical question of human agency. No? Am I the one making it, or am I just participating in the self-showing of things, of beings, no? in their richness, no? in their breadth and depth, no? in their profundity or simplicity, whatever. No? So in other words, hindi ko pinapangunahan, no? I don't preempt whatever it is that is before me, no? So I think, no, if you're a photographer, you know, and you're proceeding from that stance towards beings, no, you're not out there to capture, no, you're not out there to control them, no, to manipulate their representation, but you open yourself, you know, to the phenomenon before you, and what you do is to let it be seen, no? On its own terms, no? Not on your own terms. Kaya nga, the definition, to let what shows itself be seen from itself, just as it shows itself from itself, no? And it's not an easy thing to do, no? So in a way, a photographer proceeding from that stance is profoundly respectful, you know, of what it is before you, that in your act of photography or taking photographs, you know, you are letting be seen, you know? So you're not really whether in philosophy or photography, in arts or science, we are really merely responding to something bigger than us. I give the example of Charles Darwin. Of course, Charles Darwin was the one who planned his extremely difficult and astonishing scientific expedition to the Galapagos, right? No, he planned it, and that wasn't easy in his time, you know, taking a ship to a distant land. Sure, he was in control of the expedition. He planned it. He designed it, right? But deep down, Charles Darwin was merely reacting to something. He was responding to something that struck him. Hindi na siya yun. That wasn't him. No? Hindi lang siya makatulog. He couldn't sleep until he gets the expedition done. But I think deep down he knew, it wasn't him primarily. Something was speaking to him powerfully, that he had to do what he had to do when he embarked on that expedition. And I think the same with artists, musicians. We hear of musicians walking in the forest to be inspired. How else do we explain Vivaldi composing Quattro Stagioni, the Four Seasons, if he were not struck by the power and the beauty of the change of seasons? And I think that's the same with photography, uh, or any visual art. For that, I have an artist friend from Spain, and she says that the term now is really lens-based art. She calls herself a lens-based artist now, because we blur the distinction now between still photography and film, right? Because if you look at Akira Kurosawa, for instance, or even Tarkovsky, right? Now they had stills, no? They had still images in their minds before they did their movies, their films. No? So when we speak of photography, it's not as fixed. No? But yeah, that's what. Sorry, I've spoken a lot.
It's okay, it's okay. My takeaway here is that when you look at photography in the phenomenological lens, it points towards a certain state of humility and awe. I do not know if I'm reading it correctly, but there's always a certain awe in the sense that if to let go is really to let go of agency. Parang it's paradoxical that to let go is to not impose, and yet by not imposing, you are still acting as an agent. It humbles a photographer. Whatever you have been preconceived to believe, lalo na, for example, for me, prior to the live recording, I had so many questions because I was telling you that, Doc, I'm having a hard time reconciling the training that I had in communication arts. In a way, our training is deconstruction and language based. How language shapes, or language being the primary source of reality and not necessarily the consciousness. Yun yung conflict. When we look at images, the first thing to do as a communication arts graduate is to analyze. So and to break it down. So the signification for us, there is already a parang tendency to break down what is, instead of us letting it be it. So kaya when you specifically mentioned Heideggerian phenomenology, how do I reconcile the systems that has been built in my head and in my consciousness in a way because of my education, the presentness, the being there-ness of myself right now, ingrained in it is deconstructive. So parang I'm curious if a deconstructivist response to my encounter to the world, can that be accommodated within the the system that Heidegger has built for his philosophy?
Yeah, in terms of you mentioned being unsicht, the thing in itself, no, and maybe that's a good way to distinguish Heideggerian phenomenology. No, Heidegger is anti-Plato. I remember my mentor in Munich, the late Professor Gerhard Hefner, a Jesuit Heideggerian philosopher, and he was telling me one day that if there's one philosopher whom Heidegger hated the most, it was Plato. But in philosophy, this just means like a lover's quarrel. No, in fact, the first Trades of Being and Time, Heidegger quotes Plato. No? But what is meant by that is a philosophical stance. No? Those of you who have read Plato, no? You're familiar that the dualism in Plato, no? The realm of the sensible in the realm of the intelligible realm and the sensible realm. No? And you must have heard of the allegory of the caves. Prisoners were chained deep in a cave, and all they could see were shadows, right? It's a powerful allegory, no? And of course, at the end of it, Plato is telling us that the shadows, of course, are not the real thing. The real thing is idea, the form. And for as long as we are on Earth, no, in our human bodies, we only have glimpses of, you might say, like cheap imitations, second-rate copies. So let's say a photograph would be like the tree itself. This I'm speaking. This might be a cause for nosebleed for our those of or have joined us tonight. No? What makes a tree is not itself a tree, right? What makes a horse, it's not itself a horse. No? For Plato, it would be an eternal force. No? Like things that are beautiful because they participate in the ideal beauty. Kaya nga, even Imelda would that's bukang bibig ni Imelda yun, the true, the good, and the beautiful. I wonder if she read Plato. uh, so there, no? There is the eternal, unchanging forms, true, good, beautiful, and so on and so forth. And what we experience here in the sensible world, that is to say, when we're still trapped in our human bodies, are just second-rate or cheap imitations, as it were. I'm just speaking in vulgar language. So there's a split, and that has immense consequence. And like Christianity, for the longest time, for one, was heavily influenced by Platonism. So we look down on the body as dirty. We look down on the earth as dirty, right? We try to, flagellate ourselves. The body is sinful and dirty, and that goes all the way to Kant. Kant will say that, because you mentioned Tony earlier, that's being an sich, the thing in itself. We following Kant, we have no access to the thing in itself. All we can see are appearances. So that's from Plato all the way to Descartes, to Kant, and then Hegel. Now Heidegger is radically different in that he's saying, this Ding an sich, the thing in itself, is a fiction. Nothing stands behind the phenomena. The phenomena, yun na yun. The whole package. If I can make myself more understandable, I cannot. If I have a human being in front of me, isipin mo, what if I tell the person, you're in front of me, but you're not the real deal. There's a you in yourself, a thing in itself that I have no access to. Unfortunately, we're still imprisoned by our senses. All I can see is your appearance. For Heidegger, no. The phenomenon, that's it. No? I'm not gonna look for a thing in itself behind, standing behind the phenomenon. So the phenomenon of the human being in front of me, everything, and to some extent, Levinas did that. The phenomenology of the face, yeah, like, to give an example, love. You say love. Psychologists will measure, when you're in love, the palpitations of your heart. Your pupil will start to dilate, noticeable changes in your body. But then you say, but it's more than that. From a Heideggerian perspective, no, that everything is included. Our sense experience, everything that we see, the phenomenon, yan na yan. I'm not gonna look for something else. But at the same time, Heidegger is also profoundly influenced by the pre-Socratics, uh, particularly Heraclitus, and which I mentioned earlier, which is the constant play of concealment and unconcealment. Laging sabay na may nagtatago at may nagpapakita. And that's the reason why we never get enough of a painting, of a song, of a sculpture. You can stand before uh, whatever painting you like. You can stand before Michelangelo's David, and you will never exhaust it because it's constantly hiding something. And an old saying, ars est celare artem. It is art to hide art. No? And that's a characteristic of art. Something is hidden. No? Hindi binibigay lahat. No? May restraint yung artist. No? Because that's also how nature is, how beings are. No? Diba? In the during the pandemic, we were humbled by the pandemic. We thought we knew a lot of things. We thought we understand nature. And now pinapahiya tayo ng nature. No? That no, there are things still hidden from us, no? And will always remain hidden. No? But it's precisely the hiddenness that makes revealing and concealing possible. No? Diba? May nagpapakita kasi may sabay na nagtatago. Sabay yan eh. Maybe you can say that that's the difference between pornography and let's say art. No? Because pornography, in showing everything, it's not really showing anything. Right? It's not showing the phenomenon of the human being. Right? Whereas an art, let's say a nude photograph, a nude painting, you might say, what's the difference between that and let's say pornography? Well, because pornography doesn't know how to hide, no? Or does not allow the hiddenness to be hidden. No? Laging may nagtatago. No?
So,
Laging may nauuna sa atin. No?
so Doc,